Okay, so in this presentation, I'm just going to talk about the hormones that our body uses and how it uses these hormones ultimately to determine what energy we are using. So, testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1, glucagon, epinephrine, and cortisol are the primary hormones that um, tell our body that we need fuel for energy. So testosterone, just a couple of things that what it does. So testosterone blocks cortisol receptors, and I'll talk a little bit about cortisol on the next one. Exercise stimulates the release of testosterone. So if you want more testosterone, you want to exercise more. Dietary fat is needed for testosterone, so we need to have some fat in our diet. And interestingly, protein, carbs, or a mixed meal eaten right after exercise or resistance training causes a drop in testosterone. However, when you look at the literature, it also says that consuming your um, carbs and protein mix is going to be important. Growth hormone helps build tissue. It is an anabolic hormone. In other words, it helps build. Anabolic is building. It stimulates the release of IGF-1, and I'll talk a little bit about IGF-1 next. And it really acts in two phases. The first phase is it increases the uptake at the muscle of amino acids and glucose. So the growth hormone, I want the growth hormone in my body, and it promotes fat breakdown. And it's also released in response to hunger and exercise. So if you're hungry, growth hormone is released. When I exercise, growth hormone is released. That's not a bad thing. IGF-1 is known as insulin-like growth factor, and this stimulates cell growth, so it's anabolic, and protects against cell death, and it's stimulated by human growth hormone and a high protein or high calorie intake. And part of that has to do with the fact that when you're consuming more calories, your body thinks it needs to use those, and so ultimately your insulin growth factor is released with the increase in calories. So if you think about this, when I'm exercising and I eat post-exercise and I eat a high protein post-exercise, human growth factor is released because of that high protein that I've consumed post-exercise, and ultimately is going to help me um, have protein synthesis. Insulin, as you know, you probably hear a lot about insulin. It's an anabolic hormone. It decreases protein breakdown, so we want to have insulin in our bodies. It increases energy storage. We know this. Anytime you consume something, insulin is released, and that allows the glucose to be absorbed. And it increases the amino acid uptake. So along with glucose, it also helps with amino acid uptake. So if I'm going to consume a meal post-exercise, my insulin is going to be released, and that insulin is going to absorb both glucose as well as amino acids. And then exercise increases insulin sensitivity. In other words, when you start exercising, your body becomes more sensitive to insulin, which means your body doesn't have to make as much insulin for it to respond to what it is producing. So this is really good news for people who are overweight and type 2 diabetic, because when they exercise, you can actually help their body become more sensitive to the insulin that they are producing, which is also why you have to be careful when you're working with somebody who's a diabetic and they go and exercise, because their insulin is used up pretty quickly and so can have an effect on them. Glucagon is a catabolic hormone. In other words, it breaks things down, and it usually is released when your blood sugar level is low. So glucagon ultimately tells you when you're hungry, and it's going to stimulate the release of glycogen into glucose and also stimulate the release of amino acids to be broken down, potential amino acids to glucose. So glucagon is considered a catabolic hormone. So one of the things we don't want to do when we think about exercise is put us in a state of where we're breaking down our body in order to generate glucose. Now, when we talk about intermittent fasting, that's going to kind of make you think about fasting and why it works and what's really going on. Because glucagon is going to be released when your body tells you, hey, you're hungry. and it's going to be released in order to stimulate the breakdown of glycogen. Glycogen ultimately becoming body fat if we don't use it. Epinephrine. Epinephrine is your catabolic hormones, and it signals the release of glucose into the muscle during high intensity exercise. So if I'm doing any high intensity stuff, it's when you think of your epinephrine, you think of your flight or fight response. So this hormone's released in high intensities, put your body under stress, and then when it's under stress, it's going to release this hormone in order for you to have energy, in order for you to do the exercise, because exercise is stress. And it also signals the release of free fatty acids. So again, high intensity exercises release epinephrine and also helps us burn fat faster. Your cortisol is known as a stress hormone and usually is released when you are under stress. So it is released when you are exercising because exercise is a stress. It's active during prolonged exercise, which makes sense. When you exercise for a long time, you're stressing your body for a long time, and cortisol is going to be released. However, the good news on cortisol is in small amounts, it reduces inflammation. And ultimately, its job is to break down muscle, and it also decreases protein formation. So what we want to try to do is to decrease our stress so that our cortisol is not released, and ultimately that we don't lose muscle mass and we don't gain body fat. And so there's some literature out there about how stress levels contribute to adipose tissue and also contribute to us gaining weight. So those are the hormones which we will talk about when it comes to nutrient timing, and all of these play a role in when you consume food and how they factor in, which we will get into a little bit later.